Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time to be here today. So my name is Megan McKiernan. I'm the head of marketing here at Carbon Reform, and I'm also the program manager for the cohort that we're going to be talking about today. I've been tracking these building performance standards really closely for the past few years and working directly with building teams who are trying to figure out what compliance really looks like in practice. Many of you are likely either directly responsible for building performance standards compliance within your organization, or you're closely involved in the process. If you were part of the reporting cycle that just closed this year, we want to acknowledge the amount of work that went into that, and the fact that you're here today signals that you're already thinking about what's coming next. So the goal of this session today is to give you some clear information, starting with BEPS requirements. We'll walk you through those and what's required of your building going forward. And we'll also spend some time understanding where buildings are running into barriers when it comes to compliance. And then most importantly, we'll introduce the Maryland BEPS leadership program that we've put together, including how it's structured, the benefits it offers, and how the application process works. and the performance data behind our approach. There will be time for a Q&A at the end, so you can enter your questions in the chat there at any point during the session, and we'll review those at the end. And one more note is that we'll be making all of the resources and this presentation available after today's session, so keep an eye out for an email with that information later today. So to set the stage really quick, we're going to start with just a quick overview of Maryland's building energy performance standards. The state BEPS applies to large residential, non-residential buildings and establishes a statewide framework for reducing greenhouse gas emissions over time. So the focus here is on emissions performance, not just efficiency upgrades. The first major milestone to keep in mind with these is that 2030 target. This is the interim target, which requires a sector-specific reduction in those greenhouse gas emissions compared to your baseline levels. The first resource to the right in the blue there has a chart with the standards for each property type. And while enforcement doesn't begin until 2030, it's important to note that there are financial penalties associated with noncompliance once those targets take effect. And those penalties are structured to be material. So for many buildings, the cost of inaction can exceed the cost of making progress towards compliance. And we'll talk more about costs for meeting compliance in a bit. I also wanted to talk about today the Montgomery County Building Performance Standards. These are aligned with the state goals, that the county requirements are going to be slightly different. So Montgomery County BEPS applies to a broader set of building types. So this is going to include commercial, multifamily, and institutional buildings, unlike the state standard. And it also covers sectors like healthcare and education. Targets are in set phases like state BEPS with interim performance requirements, and those are going to be beginning in 2028. So that's a quicker deadline than that 2031 that we're seeing for state. And those are going to escalate over time as well. So buildings that fail to meet their assigned targets are going to be subject to accruing penalties starting at $500, and that's a civil offense. The county standard is also defining performance slightly differently. So these are the Montgomery County BEPS defines performance through site energy use intensity, or EUI. So rather than GHG emissions, these buildings are going to be evaluated based on how efficiently they use energy per square foot. So for buildings in both jurisdictions, both in Montgomery County, inside of Maryland, this means that compliance planning is going to need to address energy reduction and emissions reduction together, not separately. On top of BEPS, I'm sure you're seeing that energy costs are already high, especially peak demand pricing. And this is projected to keep rising throughout the rest of the decade. So as we approach that 2030 first interim target for state, rates could increase up to 40%. So if building energy use isn't decreased before then, buildings are going to be paying more every year leading up to 2030. And then once enforcement starts, penalties are going to layer on top of that. So compliance here isn't just about avoiding fines. It's really about getting ahead of long-term operating costs and putting buildings on a more stable financial path. And when we look at where those energy costs are actually coming from in commercial buildings, HVAC is always going to be the biggest piece, or most of the time going to be the biggest piece. So this breakdown here is from an actual building in our Maryland pipeline before any efficiency upgrades or technology was put in place. In this case, HVAC alone accounts for 70% of total energy use. So especially when you're looking at those first targets in 2030 or 2028 that are coming up really fast, the mindset and planning shouldn't be about doing everything at once. It's really going to be looking at where most of the energy actually goes and focusing there first. So the opportunity is there and it's measurable, but knowing where the problem is doesn't always translate to a clear path of action. So this is where a lot of BEPS plans are going to start to falter, not because the targets are unclear, but because the path to addressing this massive task feels so complex. Now, in your planning for reaching BEPS targets, you might be already seeing that traditional energy reduction projects often take years from planning and approvals to development and then actual results. Um, that you need for those interim targets, that whole process from idea to data can take 3 to 5 years. And that timeline works fine in a world without these firm performance deadlines. But under these standards, delays are going to start to matter. So this chart here is really about timing. Doing nothing and weighing your options for a while might seem like the cheapest option now. $0 in project planning today, but then once enforcement starts in 2030 or 2028, for some cases, that decision is going to show up directly as a budget problem. Now, if you are planning something like a heat pump installation, for example, those kinds of projects can absolutely be part of a long-term decarbonization strategy, but they're going to require significant upfront planning. So permitting, sometimes trenching or rerouting infrastructure, and a phased construction. So from the time you decide to move forward on a project to the time that you're actually seeing those verified reductions, those standards are going to sneak up on you and put you in the red before you even start to see results. So before we go any further, I just wanted to pause and hear from you all to see if this is resonating with any of you as you're dealing with project planning or just general operations. And you can put your answer in the chat. This is a poll. Just which of these feels like the biggest barrier to you right now? Is it the clear guidance on regulations? Is it project costs or just sheer energy costs in your operational life? Confidence in the technology or that technology is going to be able to show you results in the timeline that's provided for you? Or is it concerns majorly around disruption and downtime with major construction? So you can put that in the chat. I don't feel like there's any right or wrong answer here. In practice, most buildings are going to be experiencing at least one of these, if not more than one at the same time. And this combination of barriers, knowing where that opportunity is, but not having a clear low-risk path forward is what led us to design this Maryland BEPS leadership program. Yeah, absolutely. 5, matter of their attention span. Yeah. And we're definitely hearing that from the buildings that we've been speaking to. So I'm glad that that's resonating with you. So this is going to be the program overview. If you're just joining us here, we'll be doing a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. So feel free at any time to drop your questions in the chat. So for the program overview, the Maryland BEPS Leadership Program is a select cohort of 8 Maryland buildings. And this is going to be focused on making measurable progress towards BEPS targets in a way that's both practical and financially viable. So the program is designed for building owners who are already engaging in BEPS planning and are looking for a clearer path from targets to implementation, and then the guidance through that process so that they're not navigating BEPS alone. So partnerships will move through the program together with support around compliance planning, deployment of new technologies, funding resources, and the press that just comes from being a leader in sustainability, which we're seeing is increasingly required for stakeholders and shareholders in this market. So with that context, let's dive into compliance, what participants get in terms of clarity and support around BEPS compliance. So we're going to help buildings clearly understand where they stand today. So how their current performance lines up with these BEPS targets. And then from there, we're going to help define a realistic path to compliance. So this is the same chart that we had looked at earlier, but now you'll notice there's this blue line here. And that blue line represents what happens when you move forward through the cohort with immediate implementation and immediate results. So instead of waiting years for major capital projects, The blue line isn't just about hitting this compliance number, right? Because these reductions are going to come from operational improvements, it's going to affect your real energy savings that show up as cost savings on your utility bills. And we'll talk about the technology in a few. But just as a whole, compliance is not going to be the main goal here. That's just the end goal. It's going to be the baseline, right? So the upside is going to be lower operating costs, faster progress towards those targets, and a clear financial path along the way. So once that compliance path is clear, the question next becomes, well, what does progress unlock for my building other than avoiding fines, which is where this leadership piece is going to be coming in. So participating in the cohort is going to put your building in a clear leadership position for sustainability, which matters more and more as BEPS and ESG begins to shape how buildings are viewed by owners, tenants, investors, and partners. On the right there, I've included a resource from McKinsey that helps explain kind of why this matters. On top of internal goals, there's growing evidence that strong environmental performance is directly tied to business value. So from investor confidence to tenant demand, and even long-term asset resilience. And because of that, we intentionally built a leadership component into this cohort. And at the bottom, you'll see a snapshot of some of the outlets that Carbon Reform has worked with previously. And cohort members will have opportunities to be connected with these networks, featured in stories, and participate in some upcoming speaking events with Carbon Reform. So what's powering all this, right? How are we getting this magical set of benefits to reach compliance so fast? So at the core of our program is the carbon reduction system. So each participant of the cohort will implement a building-wide installation of the carbon reduction system. We call it the CRS, which is a retrofit-ready technology. This installs directly into existing HVAC structure, so buildings do not need to worry about major construction, long installation, or entire system replacements to start seeing results. And what it does is the system filters contaminants from indoor air, and it also permanently captures indoor CO2. And by cleaning the air at the source, buildings can safely reduce how much outside air that they need to bring in for ventilation, which is what drives a large share of HVAC energy use. So earlier we had talked about how HVAC is one of the biggest drivers of building energy use. And because of that, we see it as the fastest opportunity to make meaningful progress towards those decarbonization targets. So at the bottom of the slide there, you can see the performance ranges we typically model are up to 20% EUI reduction and up to 60% HVAC energy savings. So those savings are going to start showing up on utility bills quickly, most of the time within your first month. So this is why this approach works so well when you have those BEPS targets and deadlines to hit fast. This is a low disruption option, lower cost approach, and it produces measurable results early, which matters when enforcement is getting closer. So this slide is just going to show a closer look at what's different about how the carbon reduction system works compared to a traditional HVAC approach. So on the left, you're looking at a typical HVAC setup today. Most systems rely on bringing in large amounts of outside air to dilute contaminants inside the building. And then that outside air has to be heated, cooled, dehumidified, and all of that is extremely energy intensive. And then on the right, the carbon reduction system as a side stream captures those contaminants directly from the airstream before that dilution step. So because the air is cleaned at the source, buildings are going to be safely able to reduce their outside air intake up to 90%, all while maintaining healthy indoor air conditions. So the practical result is lower ventilation demand, less energy required to condition air, and lower overall HVAC energy use without changing how the rest of the system operates or overhauling entire systems. So because BEPS is ultimately a financial problem as much as it is a technical one, we designed the cohort so that funding is not something that participants have to figure out alone. So we're going to help buildings navigate rebates and incentives, including those from Empower Maryland, and then local utility partners as well. And many buildings already know that this kind of funding exists, but navigating eligibility, applying and stacking programs together can be difficult. So we're going to help guide you through that. And for buildings that want to reduce upfront capital pressure, we can also make introductions to lending and funding partners that are already working on these energy savings and compliance driven projects. They're already familiar with them. So this is really meant to add that flexibility into the capital planning to even enhance the progress towards those deadlines, excuse me. We're also going to provide guidance on grant opportunities. So this can include helping align with a project that already has existing grant requirements or providing light co-writing support where it makes sense for those grants. And there's been a lot of interest, we know, in carbon credits, which we can provide guidance on where those pathways may make sense longer term. So the bottom line here is that the program is designed so that project costs for the technology and everything are fully offset through the energy savings within that payback period, with incentives and lending partners and avoidant compliance penalties, all accelerating that timeline. So the goal is to make participation in the cohort financially realistic from day one, and not something that only works on paper 5 years out. So this is an example case study built off of real energy and emissions data from a Maryland office building. And this is going to be modeled with that carbon reduction system in place. So the building is located in Montgomery County. It's about 115,000 square feet. On the left is their current EUI, and which is 65.6. And then their final performance standard EUI that they're trying to get to is 55. This is how Montgomery County measures its BEPS performance. The state is going to be measuring it by greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see that the building's current EUI is 65.6, and modeled with our technology in it brings it down to 49.6. So completely surpassing that final target for their 2040 deadline. So on the right there is the financial performance and data for the Maryland state BEPS performance markers. So the state is going to look at performance through CO2 reduction, so that we're seeing 201 tons per year for this building. So that's going to translate directly to those energy reductions into emissions impact for that state reporting. Operationally and financially, that same improvement is going to show about $54,000 per year in energy savings, with a simple payback of roughly 4 years. So that's not considering any energy rebates, incentives, funding initiatives. That is just simple payback is going to be in place before that 2030 deadline starts to hit. So this isn't meant to be a promise for every building, but it's meant to show the scale and the impact and just the type of movement that's possible with this system. So I want to ground everything that we've talked about so far in real world performance. What you're seeing here is energy data from one of our customers where the carbon reduction system was installed. And when the CRS was running, we observed up to 60% reductions in HVAC electricity use and up to 90% reductions in HVAC gas use. This is based on direct metered comparisons of the system on versus off. And this performance is really what's giving us the confidence in the modeling that you saw in that mock Maryland case study before, because what matters for this program is that these results are measurable and repeatable and verifiable. So moving into what to expect timeline for the cohort, applications are now open, and these are going to be reviewed on a rolling basis. During that whole window, we'll be hosting office hours, which are meant to be genuinely helpful towards you. You can come with questions about technology, product fit, application materials, and we can walk you through an early energy savings model for your building with an estimate of EUI reduction, CO2 reduction, and how much this is all going to cost. After May 1st, applications are going to close, and we're going to move into a consideration period through June. That's when we may contact you to confirm your building details, talk through technical fit, and in some cases do a site visit. And we'll also share some preliminary estimates there around cost savings and emissions impact, so you understand what the final project scope would look like for your building. Participants are going to be selected in June. There's the opportunity to be selected beforehand, especially if you are applying before the end of this year. We have more time to review and approve you. And we will finalize scope and contracts before making anything public as an announcement for the cohort. From there, we're going to move into project kickoff so we can get the system installed and showing results in that 2026 calendar year for reporting in the following year. And through all of this, cohort participants are going to get those additional benefit support surrounding compliance and funding and visibility. So this is the criteria of what's going to make for a good application to this cohort. So buildings need to be located in Maryland, fall under the criteria for a covered building under BEPS, and be in one of these listed sectors. So you'll see we have office, higher ed, K through 12, healthcare adjacent, since hospitals and such are not covered under state BEPS, government, hospitality, and cultural spaces. We also included an other category because building portfolios don't always fit neatly into a box. And then from there, the strongest applications are going to have three things in common. Centralized HVAC system is going to be compatible with our technology. Internal alignment for that BEPS need to be addressed before those next deadlines, and access to the decision makers within the organization who can actually move a project forward. One last note on this is that if you're on this call today, your application will receive priority review. So since we are only taking one building per sector, your application gets looked at first within your sector before we evaluate any of the others. It doesn't guarantee you selection, but it does mean that you're at the front of the line when we're making those kinds of decisions. So the application itself is pretty lightweight. This should not take you long to fill out if you have all the information ready. You'll need basic building and organization info, things like address, sector, point of contact. We'll also ask for some high-level HVAC and utility information. This is just enough to really understand how your building operates. If you have energy data, benchmarking reports, an audit, you can upload those, but those are helpful for us, but those are completely optional. We don't want those missing documents to slow you down from applying if you're really interested. So before we wrap things up, I want to make sure that you're not leaving this session with unanswered questions or wondering how this applies to your building specifically. So this is the information for our office hours after today's session, where you can drop in for some practical support. And you can book directly from this link, which I'll send out after this session. Or you can reach out to me by email if these times don't work for you and you're requiring something more specific outside of those hours. And of course, we'll stay on after this session for the live Q&A as well. So I know that was a lot of information, but we really wanted to give you details on just how impactful this program can be, and make sure you're all prepared to apply. The big takeaways here is that BEPS timelines are coming up really quickly, and the Maryland BEPS Leadership Program is designed to give a small group of buildings clear, fast path to compliance with real energy savings and support along the way. We know every building is going to be different, so we want to open it up to questions. So feel free to drop those in the chat if you haven't already. And if something comes up later or you want to talk through your building more directly, that's exactly what those office hours are going to be for. Let's see. Joel said, can companies or individuals headquartered outside of Maryland be considered for the cohort? Not for this cohort. So if it's, it needs to be a building within Maryland that are working towards these building performance standards. We're aware that other areas have their own building performance standards that have just as stringent, if not more, targets, which you can reach out to us for some information on how to reach targets in New York City. Boston, I know, has Bairdo. But for this cohort specifically, we're only taking buildings within Maryland. George, let me know what you're referring to for that measured time increment. Is that the chart that we were looking at? Raj says, what's the extra benefit of joining the cohort instead of directly working for the carbon reform technology team? So the extra benefits around the cohort are going to be one, the leadership and press that comes out of this cohort. We're going to be having some speaking opportunities and events surrounding the cohort specifically, in addition to compiled case studies. And then we have all of these funding and grant proposal things are a specific benefit of this cohort. So we can typically refer you to lending partners and funding partners if you're working with us directly. But for the cohort, we're going to walk you through everything, including trying to get letting you know where you stand in your compliance journey and helping you get there. Henry says, how long on average does it take to install a CRS? So the installation is a few days. Since this is a retrofit, it is really a plug and play. It's a modular system, so there's not going to be major construction or downtime for your building. So as soon as we get everything set up and the installation scheduled, the actual installation is only a few days, 2 to 3. Sunny says, my company is a large tenant in a building, but we don't own the building itself. Do we still qualify? So there are opportunities where we can connect with the building owners to see what we can do in that situation. Likely they are trying to meet those building performance standard requirements. So it is all in how we can collaborate. Absolutely. George says there was a slide presented that included some percentage savings. I was looking for additional information of the length of time. So George, what we can do is if you reach out, we can share with you more about that study and the length of time it went over. I don't have that exact information offhand. Marianne says, as you reduce fresh makeup air intake enough to save significant amounts of energy used for HVAC, how do you ensure makeup compliance and adequate oxygen levels for participants? So outside air is not shut off completely. This is up to a 90% reduction of what's already coming through the building in a standard operation. The technology is going to solve for contaminants, VOCs, so smells. It's got a UVC light for disinfection, and in addition to capturing that CO2. So that indoor air quality is going to be pretty clean, and it's also in line with the ASHRAE standards for indoor air quality. We're an engineered solution, so while we're monitoring for all of these things, in addition to solving for that, it is perfectly safe. All right. That looks like it is most, if not all, of our questions for today. If you still have questions that you're interested, please reach out. I'll be sending out this presentation along with all the resources from the presentation after this call, and I look forward to hearing from you all.